Okay, let's dive in. Welcome, everyone.
Glad to be here.
So today, we're tackling the history of Sri Lanka.
We are, yeah. And specifically, we're looking at it through um, some particular source materials we've got.
Right. Sources describe as excerpts from Sri Lanka, a concise history. And the focus is, well, obviously Sri Lanka history.
Exactly.
So the plan is to really get into these specific excerpts, see what they pull out as the key things, the main story this source tells about Sri Lanka's past.
And right off the bat, that framing concise history that tells you something, doesn't it?
It really does. It signals that choices have been made. This isn't going to be everything.
No, definitely not exhaustive. It's more of like a distillation, a curated narrative aiming for the essentials.
Okay, so based on what we have here, these excerpts, where do they seem to start? What's the kickoff point for this concise view?
Well, it looks like it highlights the very early inhabitants, but then quickly moves to really significant cultural moments, like the legend of Vijaya's arrival, which is often presented as, foundational.
Right.
And crucially, the establishment of Buddhism on the island. Big focus on figures like King Devanapetissa and that whole process.
Okay, so the source isn't just listing an event. It's framing that arrival of Buddhism as something really fundamental.
Absolutely. It's presented as something that shapes the core identity, particularly of the main cultural group. That seems to be a cornerstone for this concise telling.
That makes sense. If you're aiming for concise, you pick the really big defining moments.
Precisely. And then following that logic, the excerpts seem to move through the eras of the major kingdoms. Anuradhapura, Polnaru.
The classical periods, and what's the focus there? The kings,
Hmm.
the wars.
Less on the minute details, it seems, and more on the major achievements, things like the sophisticated irrigation systems.
Thanks.
Exactly. And the religious architecture is prioritizing the kind of visible, lasting structures and systems of those early civilizations.
So this concise history decides that for understanding Sri Lanka quickly, you need to know about these ancient kingdoms, their water management, their Buddhist structures, not every single ruler, but the big picture legacy.
That seems to be the approach, yeah. Picking out the things with long-term resonance, then the excerpts naturally transition towards the colonial period.
Makes sense. Portuguese, Dutch, British, the usual sequence.
Right. And the focus here in this concise view appears to be mostly on the big structural changes they brought.
Like economic changes.
Yeah, the plantation economy gets a mention, changes in how the island was governed, administrative shifts. It's looking at the impact of colonialism through these broad transformations.
So less about specific battles or policies, more about here's how things fundamentally changed.
That's the feel of it. Summarizing the major effects, and then presumably the excerpts move towards independence.
And the post-independence story, again, probably the big milestones.
Likely, yes. A concise history would probably hit the major political developments, maybe touch on the origins of later tensions, but again, distilled down.
Right. So this source, by aiming for concise, it creates a specific kind of narrative. It emphasizes origins, cultural high points, the big external shocks like colonialism, and the general path to modern nationhood. It's a path through the history, not the only one.
Exactly. It's a curated selection.
Okay. So just to recap for everyone listening, we've explored these specific sources, these excerpts from Sri Lanka, a concise history, looking at how they present Sri Lanka's past.
We've seen that concise means focusing on things like Buddhism's arrival, the achievements of ancient kingdoms, the broad impact of colonial rule, and the key steps towards independence.
Highlighting those major themes and events that this source deems most essential.
And acknowledging how that curated approach shapes the story you get. It's built for accessibility, for a broad overview.
So here's something to maybe think about after this. Considering these sources and that title, A Concise History, what does that really mean for understanding a place like Sri Lanka? What perspective do you gain or maybe even lose by specifically engaging with history through a lens that's designed to condense it all down? What's the unique takeaway from that concise approach itself?